Natural farming poses a legitimate threat to big ag, and this may seem like a bold claim, maybe even a silly one, and I can understand why someone might think that. But while the idea that a framework like natural farming could actually threaten the giant agricultural companies that hold the key to global food production may be a bold claim, it's hardly a silly one. And by the end of the video, I intend on convincing you why. In this video, I'm going to explore a few of the challenges facing modern growers, both home gardeners and large-scale farmers alike. Then I want to provide a case for how and why natural farming techniques and inventions pave a way toward an all-around healthier and more economically viable future for agriculture. One of the biggest reasons that I believe change will come is because of the desire for hope in a better future for farming. And likely no one understands and feels the need for hope more than farmers. In a 2019 study among young Midwestern farmers, 53% met criteria for major depressive disorder, and 71% met criteria for generalized anxiety disorder, compared to the general US population at the time, where respective percentages sat at 7.1 and 2.7. Some studies performed by the NRHA and the CDC estimate that farmer suicide rate to be approximately 3.5 times that of the general population. One of the undeniable overriding causes of this mental illness epidemic is financial strain and crushing debt. Finally, and this brings us to the heart of the matter, among the biggest causes of economic instability amongst farmers is the rising cost of farming inputs. Fertilizer costs, pesticides, herbicides, and seed prices have spiked dramatically over the past decade. And when it comes to facing climate and environmental related challenges, the risk of farming at all only rises. I'm making some big claims here, so we'll be linking to a number of resources that you can read on your own to see where I'm getting my data. But beyond just the United States, I'm led to believe that this is more or less a global issue. One of the primary impetuses for Young-Sung Cho's book, JADAM Organic Farming, is to address the same issues of mental health amongst Korean farmers. I know we have an international audience here on this channel, so if you're watching from another country, please share in the comments what you know about farmers' mental well-being in your country. The point is, farmers are facing economic uncertainty, mental health struggles, and as a result, they're not replacing themselves. Beyond the farmers themselves, our soils are rapidly depleting and are headed for a steady stream of decreasing yields until eventually we may struggle to pull anything from the soil. We need new systems that don't rely on our current resources. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to detail the three main pillars of modern agricultural practice that I believe pose the biggest risk to soil health and the associated crop failure. And then we'll look at where natural farming presents a genuinely compelling way forward toward soil regeneration, increased crop yields, decreased cost of running a farm, and an overall more hope-filled life for the average farmer. If you're growing on a smaller scale at home or perhaps on an urban or suburban homestead, this will likely be relevant to you as well. One way that we could think about the soil is that it sort of functions like the garden's digestive system. And here I'd like to share a small personal story to illustrate the point. In my late teens and early 20s, I suffered from major gut-related health issues. I had leaky gut syndrome and irritable bowel syndrome, and my overall health was suffering as a result. My skin was bad, I felt uncomfortable all the time, and I was constantly getting sick. But after years of research paired with significant dietary and lifestyle changes, I was able to turn around my health, and I'm now IBS and leaky gut free. My skin has recovered substantially, and I rarely get sick anymore. Now, in my research, I came to realize a couple of things about my health that had been compromised. Firstly, I had taken numerous antibiotics over the years without replenishing my gut with probiotics. Second, I was eating foods that were difficult on my digestive tract, damaging my gut lining and allowing harmful substances to pass in my bloodstream. All of this led to other health issues, mentally, hormonally, and immunologically, which was I was constantly fighting off inflammation in my body without a meaningful defense. What I did to repair my gut falls into two additions and one subtraction. The first thing I added was beef bone broth, which is high in collagen, glycine, gelatin, and other compounds that strengthen the intestinal lining. Still drink bone broth regularly to this day. And the second addition was regular probiotic consumption. I started making and drinking kombucha, raw milk, kefir, along with some other fermented foods like sauerkraut and lacto-fermented foods. Finally, what I subtracted was as much as what I could find that was disrupting my digestion. The main things being inflammatory seed oils, A1 dairy, and super refined sugars and grains. All of this led to a rapid recovery over the course of 6-month span, and then a gradual but a steady recovery to where I am today. Of course, I share none of this as medical expertise. This is just what worked for me, and I'm really grateful for it. But having gone through that experience, I was given the ability to see soil health in a very personal light. I said previously that the soil is like the garden's digestive system. It's where food is processed, broken down, converted, absorbed, utilized. It's where diseases and imbalances are dealt with, and so much more. And so, as was the case for me when I was recovering my gut health, if we're going to take care of our garden's microbiome, we need to consider what we are feeding it and what we might need to remove from its diet, namely what is disrupting the microbial systems at work and causing them to break down. So let's start by defining a clear goal for a growing space that would indicate a healthy soil microbiome. At the most ideal state, we'd see a field where plants are growing strong because they're getting all the nutrients they need. Abundant microbial communities are continually engaging in the plant root exudate exchange for every nutrient that the plant needs. Because of this, hypothetically, any plant that is grown in this field is going to provide a more nutrient-dense food source, unlike soils where microbes haven't had access or ability to break down and deliver nutrients to plants. Plants in our ideal field are also able to access water readily because the soil retains water easily. It's high in organic matter, there's minimal compaction, and millions of little tiny waterways created by arthropods and earthworms help slow down and catch water in the soil. We might notice a small degree of pest damage in a field with healthy soil, especially if we've planted a variety of native perennials in a nearby field, because they're designed specifically to provide a food source for wildlife. But no one insect is able to get out of control. Robust communities of microbes enhance a plant's sensory responses, so when an insect or pathogen does attack, the plant can respond with aid from various microbes in various ways. They can help stimulate a rapid immune response that helps repair damaged plant cells. They can release antibiotic chemicals that either deter or even kill pathogens and insects. Bacillus-generated lipopeptides and surfactants can actually punch holes in pathogen membranes. Not sure if you knew that, but that's pretty cool. Similarly, nematodes and fungi can defend the plant rhizosphere, the area that surrounds a plant's root system, by infecting insect larvae in the soil before they have had the chance to cause too much damage to a plant's root system. So what might stop these microbes from doing this incredible work? If you're a regular on this channel, it will be no surprise for you to hear most of these, but in order to achieve an ideal soil microbiome, we need to start by removing tillage, Cides, and fertilizers. These are what I consider the big three disruptors. But what about each of them specifically harms soil biology? Let's start by looking at how tillage might set us back. When a plant first germinates or is transplanted in the soil that contains mycorrhizal fungi spores, those spores germinate in response to the plant root signals. Fungal hyphae grow toward the roots and penetrate within the first 2 to 6 weeks of planting. Once the roots have been colonized by this fungi, it takes between 1 to 3 months for the fungi to start forming their mycelial networks. The hyphae extend 10 to 20 times farther than the plant roots. They're engaging in nutrient exchange, and over the course of a full growing season, these hyphal networks start linking multiple plants together, even across different plant species. This allows plants to communicate with each other within the field and potentially even beyond. And because many plants work symbiotically, they will even share nutrients, plant defense chemicals, and other signals within the network of mycorrhizae. Now, in perennial systems like forests and grasslands, these fungal networks stay awake indefinitely. And more than that, they will likely become stronger and stronger as the years pass. And this is why permaculture enthusiasts are so enthralled with food forests, because year after year, without disturbance, their fungal networks are running rich and deep, and everything in the field is tapped in. Without a plant host, however, the mycorrhizal fungi will largely go dormant and become spores within a few weeks to a month. Not entirely, though. Some hyphal fragments will remain, and some of the fungi will live overwinter inside plant root fragments. So for an annual garden bed, what does tillage do? Well, first of all, it slices up the remaining hyphal fragments and kills them off. It also mixes up the residual fungal spores in the soil, which seems like it would be a good thing until you remember that spores germinate in the root zone, where the germinating seed signals that it's time for them to start helping each other. So some spores may end up back in the root zone, but many will end up deeper in the soil, out of reach, and others will end up on the soil surface where they get zapped by the sun. A one-time till won't set you back too far, especially if you don't have tons or any mycelial development in the soil yet, but annual tillage is like hitting the reset button every year. And chronic tillage has been shown to result in worsening compaction in soil, making it difficult for delicate fungal networks to travel. Another negative effect of tillage is that it destroys earthworm and arthropod habits, at best collapsing the tunnels that they've created in the soil, and at worst directly slicing or crushing them. Numerous studies have shown that decreased earthworm activity in frequently tilled soils. Let's take a look at our Cides. These are our herbicides, insecticides, pesticides, fungicides. Anything that you can buy with the word Cide on it is unlikely to bring biological flourishing to the garden. And it should be obvious because Cide means to cut off or to kill, and biology is about living. We're not gonna take a look at every single Cide available to modern growers, but a few are worth our attention. The most ubiquitous and controversial being glyphosate, street name Roundup. This is one of the most popular weed killers of all time. It's remarkably effective in targeting metabolic pathways of select plants, but all plants are going to be affected at some level, and most of the microbes are as well. Here's why. Glyphosate targets a plant enzyme called EPSPS. This enzyme is part of a pathway which plants use to make essential amino acids. When that pathway is disrupted, amino acid production stops, proteins aren't formed, growth stops, plant dies. So unless you're planting Roundup Ready or genetically modified glyphosate-resistant plants, you don't want to be using Roundup at all. But what about killing off those pesky weeds early in the season, before you plant your spring garden? Well, the thing about glyphosate is that it binds itself to soil particles, meaning that it stays in the soil for weeks or even months after being applied. Some growers have found glyphosate residue persisting season to season. But what's really scary about glyphosate is how disruptive it is to the microbial communities that we've been talking about. Many beneficial microbes use the same metabolic pathway that glyphosate targets in plants. Glyphosate has been shown to bind micronutrients in the soil, meaning it's weakening microbial communities and locking out essential nutrients from plant roots. We're not even going to get into the negative effects of glyphosate on human health. Toxic pesticides have been shown, not surprisingly, to harm arthropods and earthworms. They can accumulate in the soil and harm predatory nematodes and protozoa. And some insecticides are even toxic to nitrogen-fixing bacteria and other beneficial microbes. Fungicides are meant to target fungal pathogens, and small amounts of very clean sulfur-based fungicide might be able to keep pathogenic microbes in check. But most fungicides are not clean, and additional fungicidal compounds in these sprays have been shown to kill mycorrhizal fungi, trichoderma, and other species that can cause imbalance in the fungal bacterial dynamic. Now, with all of those chemical killers flying throughout the air and absorbing into the soil, one might wonder how the surviving plants in that soil will ever be able to access the nutrients needed to actually grow and produce a crop. And this is where the third piece of the puzzle comes into play: synthetic fertilizers. Now, we just released a video explaining the basics of soil biology, but in case you didn't catch it, here's a quick refresher. In healthy soils, microbes digest organic matter, release nutrients gradually, and deliver them to plants at the root zone in exchange for root exudates. But what happens when these microbial communities are weakened or non-existent, say from repeated tillage and herbicide application? Well, science has found a way to do the pre-work of synthesizing nutrients, making them bioavailable to plants in a lab, meaning that we can purchase plant-ready nutrients that are already water-soluble and then just reapply those directly to the root zones of our plants. No need for the nitrification cycle, no need for microbes to mine for phosphorus and potassium in the depths of the earth. Instead, with pre-made blends of N, P, and K, you can feed your plants directly. And I'm not going to pretend that this isn't remarkably impressive and kind of an essential invention for modern ag. It's because of these techniques, all of them really, that we've been able to produce more food for more people over the past 100 years than ever before. However, it's really worth looking at what's happening in the soil over the long term when these synthetic fertilizers are applied. Fertilizers are obviously going to be required if the ground has been tilled and sprayed, because microbial populations that would ordinarily be able to deliver the nutrients may be significantly reduced. But what if the soil wasn't tilled or sprayed? What would happen to microbial communities if only plant-available sources of N, P, and K were provided? Remember that plants and microbes live symbiotically. They rely on each other for nourishment. Plants exude simple carbohydrates for the microbes. Microbes deliver nutrients in the rhizosphere or even directly into the root. But if all the nutrients are pre-made and ready to consume by a plant, it doesn't actually need the microbes anymore. So there's no need for a root to secrete carbohydrates. It just uptakes the nutrients that it needs. Without the root exudates, microbial communities starve. Without microbial communities, we start losing the secondary benefits of immune help and building soil structure. And beyond that, when microbial communities decline, it means that until you work to reestablish those communities, you have to purchase more fertilizer. And this is what we call a bottleneck. If at some point we were to lose access to fertilizers, whether it's because of rising costs or we deplete our sources, we then lose access to growing plants because we've been reliant on the IV drip without nurturing the soil biology. Beyond causing the microbial communities to atrophy, repeated fertilizer usage can lead to groundwater pollution, neglect of micronutrients, leading to overall less nutrient-dense food, and other challenges in growing healthy plants. Here's the main point that I'm trying to make with all of this. Tillage, herbicidal, pesticidal, fungicidal applications, and synthetic fertilizer usage are kind of a package deal. Tillage disrupts soil structure and fungi, reducing natural fertility. Pests and weed killers suppress soil biology even further, resulting in plants losing their microbial allies. Synthetic fertilizers step in as a crutch that bypasses biology to keep plants alive, but continues to weaken soil over time, making it more necessary to rinse and repeat. You do one, you become highly incentivized to do them all. I'm not saying that you have to or that everyone does. And honestly, I'm not trying to blame anyone or shame anyone who is trying to grow food for their family, community, or country. It's not the growers that are the problem. The problem is that we've inherited a system where a small number of companies control a large percentage of most of the global seed, pesticide, and fertilizer markets. It's in their best interest to get growers stuck on their products. That's how they make money, and is by bringing you back year after year after year. They're disincentivized from helping you regenerate your soil because then they would have nothing to sell you. And trust me, this is not meant to be an anti-capitalist, anti-business rant. We just need to look at where the market is taking the soil. The future doesn't look bright for farming, which is why regenerative growing techniques have become so popular in recent years. We're able to see where our current system is taking us. On this channel, we're all about solutions, and as you may have already guessed, one of the solutions that I want to look at today is natural farming. At its core, natural farming takes the emphasis off of the mechanical and chemical components of intensive farming and places a huge emphasis on biology. One of the main reasons that I'm such a believer in these techniques is because of my personal health journey that I described earlier in the video. The fact is, like my personal gut health, the soil can recover, and much of the help comes from probiotics, beneficial microbes that know what to do to bring healing and restoration. There are many promising approaches to correcting the course of modern agricultural problems, but among them, Korean natural farming and JADAM Organic Farming are two that hold legitimate weight. And the reason for that is that they have accepted, adapted, and integrated their frameworks into the systems already at play. They utilize much of the infrastructure already present in our modern agricultural practices. So let's get specific. In any conventional growing operation, from a large home garden to a 100,000 acre farm, some form of the following pattern is going to be present: field prep, soil amendment, planting, maintenance, harvest. What this often looks like is in the spring, the soil is tilled, fertilizers applied, and either immediately prior to or following planting, an herbicide is applied to the fields and garden beds to kill off weeds. Once crops are in the ground, more fertilizer may be applied as needed to stimulate more rapid growth, and pesticides and fungicides are used as needed as crops are affected by insect and disease pressure. Of course, there is variation in all of this, and not all crops or farms grow the exact same, But some form of this regimen is followed within the conventional framework SOPs. Here's where both KNF and JADAM are designed to slot in alternative inputs and techniques into the pre-existing framework. And I'll start with the more complicated of the two, which is KNF. So rather than applying fertilizers prior to planting, in KNF we have alternative inputs that form a soil foundation protocol that gets the ground ready for planting. There are 9 core inputs within the KNF system, all of which can be made on or near the farm or collected in the case of seawater. And it's not necessarily essential to apply all of the 9. The way that I recommend home growers and farmers transition to a DIY inputs-based growing approach is more gradual. So I'll list the inputs. It's gonna sound like a whole lot more complicated than just applying an all-purpose fertilizer at the beginning of the season, but hang in there for now. The 9 inputs in KNF are fermented plant juice, fermented fish amino acids, oriental herbal nutrient, lactic acid bacteria, seawater, brown rice vinegar, water-soluble calcium acetate and phosphorus, and of course indigenous microorganisms, or IMO. Again, if you haven't heard about these inputs, or maybe you're still wrapping your brain around all of them, don't bail on me yet. These inputs take various amounts of time to make, but once you have them, they will last you all season, most likely, and in some cases even longer. What we're looking at here is a suite of largely liquid soil amendments that have 2 tasks as they address the soil. The first is to create conditions that are suitable for microbial flourishing, and the second is to supply microbial activity. So inputs like seawater, FPJ, FAA, WCA, and WCP are largely going to be supplying microbes and plants with small amounts of essential nutrients. OHN and vinegar are helping shape the environment so the pathogenic bacteria and fungi are not welcome and beneficial microbes can flourish. LAB, FPJ, and seawater are also going to supply some beneficial bacteria into the mix that start inhabiting the space and help crowd out bad microbes. All of these inputs work together to perform various functions within the soil that create balance. Now, if the thought of pouring salt and vinegar on your garden scares you, don't worry. All of the inputs are applied at very diluted amounts, so there's really no risk to harming your soil with these unless you go way overboard and you just dump seawater without diluting it all. Now, one thing that KNF and JADAM both recognize is the cyclical nature of plant growth. The plant growth cycle of germination, vegetative growth, transition, reproduction, and senescence or decline is something that these inputs cycle in and out of application to address. For instance, in the early stages of a plant's life cycle, shortly after planting, fermented plant juice and fish amino acids, they're going to be really valuable to help them put on some plant mass. But as the plant shifts into its reproduction and fruiting stages, it's going to need some different hormones and nutrients, so we may cycle in calcium acetate and phosphate in place of the fermented plant juices and fish amino acids. These later stages in a plant life cycle require less nitrogen and growth hormones and more calcium for fruit production and natural defense chemicals against pest pressure. In essence, KNF and JADAM both recognize that what a plant needs at one stage of its growth journey, it may not need at another. Let's return to addressing the other pieces of the conventional growing framework. We've looked at how KNF can slot in amendments in place of standard synthetic fertilizers as the soil is prepped for planting and as plants are encouraged to grow. With the application of healthy lactic acid bacteria and the antifungal compounds found in oriental herbal nutrient, the need for fungicides drastically reduces. Of course, it takes time for healthy microbes to get established in the environment, so none of this will be a single year recovery plan, but even just a regular application of LAB, one of the more simple and cheap inputs that you can make, can help your plants overcome minor disease problems. One of the hardest transitions I can imagine it must be for farmers to make is to move away from tillage. And for this, we really need to adopt a long-term mindset. First of all, tillage is not some sort of evil behavior that needs to be put to death. In reality, a one-time till might actually be just what's needed to establish or reestablish a garden bed or crop field. But stopping tilling after that is often not quite enough. Most agricultural soils need some serious TLC, and there's maybe nothing so effective as indigenous microorganisms to remediate damaged soils. We have several videos detailing the process of capturing and culturing IMOs from your local environment, so check those out or explore our free downloadable beginner's guide in the description. But with the application of these indigenous microbes, we really can begin to see a path open up that could remove tillage quickly. Properly made IMO supplies soil with some of the strongest and most resilient microorganisms, especially fungi. So much so that soil tilth is naturally improved very quickly. With all of the microbial activity saturating the soil, the earthworms and arthropods return and tilthify the ground for you. Of course, I'm speaking in ideals here. Not everyone will find an immediate change to their soil, and no one field is exactly the same as another. But if the time spent to till the field and the funds spent to upkeep the equipment were spent on cultivating IMOs and applying them to the field, I believe that many farms would see rapid repair of their soil and an overall easier time growing crops. JADAM Organic Farming serves another adjacent role in the natural farming world, where KNF contains 9 core inputs, a few of which are a little challenging to make. JADAM reduces things down to 5 key inputs, all of which are highly DIY-able. The subtitle of Cho's book is The Way to Ultra Low-Cost Agriculture, and the cost that Cho refers to applies to the money and the time needed to create the inputs. The liquid fertilizer takes an hour of hands-on work to make and then a month to age on its own. The microbial solution takes 5 minutes to set up and a few days to brew before it's ready to apply. And where JADAM takes an even more applicable approach to slotting in its amendments than KNF, Cho demonstrates recipes for making an all-natural pesticide that can be adapted to suit your specific pest needs. He has recipes for very clean biodegradable wetting agents, as well as pure water-soluble sulfur fungicide that keeps beneficial fungi alive and targets pathogenic fungi. And with these recipes at a farmer's fingertips, the road forward beyond the conventional framework becomes even more promising. Of course, much of our work on this channel has been to highlight these techniques for home gardeners, but many farmers have found JADAM and KNF a promising solution to their degrading soils and rising input costs. If you're interested in learning more about any of these inputs, you can check out our playlists and our free resources in the description below this video. I'm also in the process of putting together a home gardener's guide to Korean natural farming. So if you would like to be notified for when that's getting released, you can sign up for our email list, our email newsletter. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.